I'm Peggy Fry, Interim University Librarian, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for the annual Ellen Catherine Gstalder Memorial Lecture with Father James Martin. The Gstalder Lecture was established in memory of Ellen Gstalder, a 1998 graduate of Georgetown College, by her family to honor Ellen's concern for social justice issues in the United States. Ellen joined Teach for America upon graduation and was assigned to a DC public school in Anacostia. After her 2-year commitment, Ellen remained at the school and planned to continue teaching, go to graduate school, and work for the reform of the education system or the nutrition available to poor children, both of which appalled her. Sadly, Ellen became ill in the fall of her 3rd teaching year and passed away in 2004. The Gstalder family's generosity honors Ellen's legacy by bringing to campus thought-provoking speakers on significant social topics and economic issues. We are honored to have the Gstalder family here with us tonight. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Georgetown University Division of Student Affairs and the LGBTQ Resource Center for their support and assistance in publicizing the lecture. At the conclusion of the event, there will be a question and answer session. If you have a question, please be sure to phrase it in the form of a question. And in the interest of time, please be concise. Please remember that Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that not everyone may share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event respects the right of the speaker and the organizing group to share their perspectives and ideas by not causing a disruption to the event's activities. We are very fortunate this evening to be joined by Father James Martin. Father Martin is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large of America magazine, and best-selling author of numerous books, including his most recent work, Building a Bridge: How the Catholic Church and the LGBT community can enter into a relationship of respect, compassion, and sensitivity. I'd like now to ask Father Mark Bosco, Vice President of Mission and Ministry at Georgetown, to introduce Father Martin.
Thank you, Peggy, for this invitation to be with you and with everyone here tonight at this Gstalder Memorial Lecture. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce my brother Jesuit, Father James Martin, as our guest speaker. Jim entered the Society of Jesus in 1988, just 2 years before I did. We were just kind of figuring this out, actually. After graduating from the Wharton School of Business and after some years working in corporate finance for General Electric. He did the normal course of studies, if there's ever a normal course of Jesuit studies, a philosophy degree at Loyola University Chicago, theology degrees at Wharton School of Theology in Cambridge and Massachusetts, as well as time in Jesuit formation, working in Nairobi, Kenya, helping them start small businesses. Jim was ordained to the priesthood in 1999 and began working as an editor and writer at the Jesuit journal America magazine soon after. Jim's great talent, at least for me, a brother Jesuit, is his Ignatian style of sharing with others his own life experience, both as a source for engaging the breadth and the depth of his Roman Catholic faith and engaging contemporary issues of social and economic justice. As a Jesuit public intellectual, he has invited his readers and his viewers. As you probably know, he was a regular on Comedy Central's The Colbert Report, and is today a frequent guest on many radio and TV stations. He's invited us to see the Catholic intellectual, artistic, and spiritual heritage as resources for living out a faithful and committed life to God and to one another. His many best-selling books bear this out. He writes memoirs and journeys in such books as This Our Exile, A Spiritual Journey with Refugees of East Africa, or In Good Company, the fast track from the corporate world of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And a very profound book that I read soon after 9/11, Searching for God at Ground Zero. He's also taken his readers on pilgrimage with books such as The Lord's Diary, 7 Days at the Grotto of Massabielle, and his trip to the Holy Land in his book, Jesus, A Pilgrimage. And he has shared with his readers the great treasures of Ignatian spirituality in his book, The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, A Spirituality for Real Life. I think Jesuits enjoy reading this book because he quotes so many people that we know, or he mentions somebody like, oh yeah, I remember Father Fleming, and oh, I remember so-and-so. So it's always a treat to read that. But throughout all of his writing and his many public engagements, Jim brings warmth, insight, and humor. Tonight, Father Martin joins us, as we heard, to discuss his most recent and, if truth be told, most contentious book, Building a Bridge: How the Catholic Church and LGBT community can enter into a relationship of respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Jim, we are deeply grateful for your ongoing engagement with this important issue and your dedicated leadership in bridging the divides in politics, society, and the Catholic faith. Thank you for your faithful service on behalf of the Church, and thank you for your presence here tonight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Father James Martin.
Thank you, Mark. And yes, truth be told, it is my most contentious book. No one seemed to care when I wrote about lords. I'm very happy to be here. I especially want to recognize Herb and Bobby Gstalder and the Gstalder family. Can you stand up so everyone can see you? And can we give them some applause? Rare for me in terms of a named lecture. Herb and Bobby actually drove me up to a retreat at Eastern Point Retreat House in Gloucester, Mass. a few weeks ago? A few weeks or a few months ago. Door to door from my Jesuit community in New York to Eastern Point Retreat House. And so I got a chance to get to know them well and also hear about their wonderful daughter. So being here in her name, given what they told me about her and the little bit that you heard about her, someone who was passionate for social justice and people on the margins, really gives me a lot of joy. So I want to say thank you to begin with. Today I want to talk about a bridge. I want to talk about a bridge between the LGBT Catholic community and the Catholic Church. Let me take my watch off. I don't want to go over the allotted 6-hour time period. By the way, go Hoyas before I forget. That's from the Gospel of Mark. It's 6:27. The relationship between the LGBT Catholic community and the Catholic Church in our country has been at times contentious and combative, and at times warm and welcoming. Much of the tension that characterizes this complicated relationship results, I think, from a lack of communication and a good deal of mistrust between LGBT Catholics and the hierarchy. So what is needed, I think, or I would suggest, is a bridge between that community and the Church. So I'd like to invite you all to think about that bridge, what it might mean, and to reflect on both the Church's outreach to the LGBT community and the LGBT community's outreach to the Church, because good bridges take people in both directions, right? The Catechism invites us all to treat LGBT people with, in the great words of the Catechism, respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Now, what might that mean? And what might it mean for the LGBT community to do the same for the institutional church? By the way, when I refer to the institutional church, I know we're at Georgetown, a lot of theologians may be here, even in the audience, that the church can mean many things. The church, of course, is, to use the terminology of the Second Vatican Council, the whole people of God, right? Everyone is in the church, not just the hierarchy. But when I talk about the church tonight, I'm going to talk about the institutional church. And that's more than just the Vatican and the hierarchy of bishops. It's everyone who is a decision maker in the church, right? Everyone who has a role of making a decision. So therefore, someone who is a lay person, who is the president of a Catholic high school, right, or someone like Jack DeJoy, I would consider part of the institutional church because that person can make decisions, right, about whether or not they want to, for example, hire or fire an LGBT person. So the institutional church are the decision makers. So tonight, I'd like to take a walk on the first lane of that bridge, the one leading from the institutional church to the LGBT Catholic community, and reflect on what it might mean for the church, again, the institutional church, to treat LGBT Catholics with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. There's another lane from the LGBT community to the church, but I'll leave you to read about that in my book, which makes the perfect gift for your friends and family, and is coming out in a revised and expanded version in March. It's true. So respect. What might respect mean? We've got to take these words seriously. First of all, respect means, at the very least, recognizing that LGBT Catholics exist. Okay? They exist. They're here. And extending to them the same recognition that any community deserves because of its presence among us in the church. In 2016, after the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub, remember, in Orlando, where 49 people were killed, at the time it was the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. While some Catholic bishops expressed their support for the LGBT community, while some church leaders in other denominations expressed their support, very few Catholic bishops did. Now, you know very well that after a massacre, right, almost reflexively and rightly, there is a press release from the U.S. Bishops' Conference or from other bishops. You know, we stand with our Methodist brothers and sisters, or we stand with our brothers and sisters in Kentucky. Only a handful of bishops thought to send out any sort of press release, and those that did, fewer of them mentioned the words LGBT or gay. To me, that revealed a failure to acknowledge the very existence of this community. And this is not a Christian model, because Jesus recognizes all people, even those who are invisible in the community. In fact, he reaches out specifically to those on the margins. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Catholics, therefore, have a responsibility to make everyone feel visible and valuable. Recognizing that LGBT Catholics exist has important pastoral implications as well. It means carrying out ministries that some dioceses and parishes and schools already do very well. I live next to our Jesuit community. One of my Jesuit brothers is here from my community, Father Joe Parks. We live next door to a church. Literally, we're in the old convent, and it's the Church of St. Paul the Apostle. And they have a flourishing ministry called Out at St. Paul's, right? I mean, very, very progressive and very welcoming. So they have an outreach program. Some dioceses do retreats for LGBT people, LGBT masses, those kinds of things. It's to help LGBT Catholics feel that they are part of the church, that they're welcomed and loved. Now, some Catholics object to this, which is kind of an understatement. Just go online. And they say that any outreach implies a tacit agreement with everything that anyone in the LGBT community says or does. But that's an unfair objection because it is raised with no other group in the church. If a diocese or parish sponsors, for example, an outreach program for Catholic business leaders, right? No one says, oh my gosh, you're accepting all of the ethos of corporate America. What about Laudato Si? What about the great social encyclicals? No one says that. No one critiques the church for sort of adopting everything that the Catholic business community says. Why? Because people understand that a parish or diocese or school is simply trying to make that particular group feel more connected to the church, to their church, the church they belong to by virtue of their baptism. Second, respect means calling a group what it asks to be called. If on a personal level, you came up to me and you started calling me Father Martin, I'd say, oh, call me Jim. Yeah, okay. Or if you started calling me Jimmy, which is something only my family calls me, and I said, call me Jim. And you persisted, what would people around you think? Hey, Jimmy. People around you would think, oh, that's pretty rude. It's common courtesy to call people what they ask to be called. It's the same on a group level. We don't say Negroes any longer. Why? Because that group feels more comfortable with other names, like African Americans or blacks. Recently, I was told that disabled persons is not as acceptable as persons with disabilities. So now I'll use the latter term. Why? It's respectful to call people by the name that they choose. and it costs me nothing. Everyone has a right to the name they wish to be called by. This is not some minor concern. In the Jewish and Christian traditions, names are important, right? A name in the Hebrew Scriptures stands for a person's identity. Knowing a person's name meant, in a sense, that you knew the person, right? That there was a certain intimacy that you had with the person, and even that you had a kind of power over the person, right? That's why there's so much emphasis on, tell me your name. That's why in the Old Testament, when Moses asks God to tell him his name, what does God say? I am who am, right? In other words, none of your business. That's what that means, none of your business. My name is for me, right? God's name is holy. Jesus renames Simon as Peter in the New Testament. The persecutor Saul renames himself as Paul. Names are important in our church as well. The very first question a priest or deacon asks parents at an infant's baptism in the Catholic Church is, what name do you give this child? Is that interesting? That's the first question, naming. Because names are important, church leaders are invited to be attentive to how they name the LGBT community. So let us finally lay to rest phrases like afflicted with same-sex attraction, which no LGBT person who I have ever met uses. Ever. Oh, hi, I'm afflicted with same-sex attraction. Or even homosexual person, which seems to many people overly clinical. Let's listen instead to what our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and siblings prefer to name themselves, right? I'm not saying which, there are so many names, right? There's LGBT, LGBTQ, queer, LGBTQ+. I'm not saying which ones to name them or use, but that we should listen to them, right? They have a right. And if Pope Francis, for Pete's sakes, the 81-year-old former Argentine provincial, can use the word gay, so can everybody else. Respect also means acknowledging that LGBT Catholics bring unique gifts to the church as individuals and as a community. These gifts build up the church in special ways, as St. Paul wrote when he compared the church to the body, right? The people of God to a human body. Every body part is important, the hand, the eye, the foot. Just think for a moment, just pause for a second, and think of the LGBT Catholics that you know. Just pause. Think about what they bring. The church is invited to meditate on how LGBT Catholics build up the church with their very presence, in the same way that other groups build up a parish or diocese. And though it is wrong to generalize, we can still pose the question, what might those gifts be? Now, I know generalizations are often wrong, but for a group that's treated like dirt, it's important to lift them up as a group. Many LGBT people have endured from an early age misunderstanding, prejudice, hatred, persecution, even violence, and therefore, in my experience, feel a natural compassion for people on the margins. Their compassion is a gift, right? Compassion is a gift. They bring that to the church. They have often been made to feel unwelcome in their parishes and church, and that is an understatement. But they persevere. So since this book came out, I obviously knew LGBT Catholics before. Since this book came out, I have been, it's not an exaggeration, deluged with cards, phone calls, Facebook messages in particular, from people who are really suffering and struggling. I could go on for hours telling you. I'll tell you one. This is just the other day. Someone called me, I'll skip the intro, and it was an autistic man, 30 years old, who had just come out, right? Whose priest told him he could no longer present himself for communion. Now, the autistic man, by the way, was not in a relationship. This is how these people are treated. A woman Facebook messaged me and said, Father, do you know any compassionate priests in my diocese? This is an American diocese. I work in a hospice, and there's a man there who's dying, and who the priest that is assigned to our hospice is refusing to anoint because he's gay. This is what these people put up with. But you know what? They persevere. Their perseverance is a gift. They are often forgiving of clergy, in particular, who treat them like dirt. Their forgiveness is a gift. Now, there are other gifts they bring on a personal level, but I think as a community, these are three gifts that they bring: compassion, perseverance, and forgiveness. Seeing, naming, and honoring all these gifts are components of respecting them. So is accepting them as beloved children of God and letting them know that they are beloved children of God. Respect should also be extended to the workplace, especially if that workplace is a church or church-related organization. To that end, I'm very concerned with the recent trend of the firing of LGBT men and women. Of course, church organizations have the authority to require church employees to follow church teachings. That's a given, right? So if I end up working somehow, I'm lucky enough to work at Georgetown at some point in my dotage, and I take this podium, I bring it back to my Jesuit community, which, is actually not beyond the realm of possibility for Jesuits. And Jack DeJoya says, you know what? We don't do that here. He has a right to set, the rules of working. So that makes sense. So church organizations have the authority to require their employees to follow certain church teachings, right? The problem is that this authority is applied highly selectively. Almost all of the firings in recent years have focused on what? LGBT matters. Specifically, they have related to those employees who have entered into same-sex marriage, which is against church teaching, and where one or the other partner has a public role in the church. But if adherence to church teaching, which is how it's presented, these people are being fired because they are not adhering to church teaching, is going to be a litmus test for employment in Catholic institutions, then dioceses and parishes and schools need to be consistent. So therefore, do we fire people who are divorced and remarried without an annulment? It's against church teaching. Or people, men and women, who bear children out of wedlock, right? It's against church teaching. Or do we fire all men and women who are living together before being married? How about all men and women who are living together? All against church teaching. How about birth control? These actions are against church teaching. And what about if adherence to the teaching of the Catholic Church is a litmus test, what about employees who are not Catholic? If we fire employees who do not agree or adhere with church teaching, then we have to fire all Protestants who work in our Catholic institutions because they don't believe in, papal authority, for example, right? That's an important church teaching. Do we do that? No, we don't do that. Do we fire Unitarians who don't believe in the Trinity? Do we fire people for these things? No, we do not. Why? Because we are selective about which church teachings matter and which church teachings we will enforce. Here's another way of looking at this kind of selectivity, one that shows why it is especially problematic. Requiring church employees to adhere to church teaching means at a much more fundamental level adhering to the gospel. That's the most fundamental church teaching. I find it very interesting when people critique people for sort of being in favor of LGBT Catholics, they say, what about church teaching? What they mean is one line of the catechism. They don't mean the Gospels. So, do we fire people who do not adhere to the gospel? Therefore, do we fire people who are not helping the poor? That's a pretty important church teaching. Do we fire people who are not forgiving? Do we fire people who are cruel? All right? Now, one bishop online said, well, no, because, entering into same-sex, this is a reasonable response. Entering into same-sex marriage is a public scandal. Now, if you don't think that being a cruel person and working in a Catholic parish is not a scandal, then I don't know what to say, right? The selectivity of focus on LGBT matters when it comes to firings is, to use the word of the Catechism, a sign of unjust discrimination. It is a targeting of LGBT people, and it is something we are asked to avoid by the Catechism. So, respect. Compassion. What would it mean for the church to show compassion to LGBT Catholics? Now, the word compassion, it's very beautiful. It comes from the Greek pascho, right? To experience or to suffer. Compassion, to experience with or to suffer with. What would it mean for the institutional church not just to respect LGBT Catholics, but to experience life with them and to suffer with them? What would that mean? The first and most essential requirement is listening, right? It's impossible to be compassionate if you don't listen to someone. Imagine coming up to me in a pastoral situation saying, oh, Father, I'm going through the toughest time. I really need your compassion. My problem is, I don't need to hear it. I'll just be compassionate, right? It's insane. No. Just let me be compassionate. We have to listen. What's going on in your life? What's happening? What are you experiencing? We have to ask questions. Questions that Catholic leaders might ask their LGBT brothers and sisters and siblings are, what was it like growing up as a gay boy? What was that like? What was it like growing up as a girl who found out that she was attracted to other girls? A very important question, which we still are struggling with. What is it like being a transgender person? What is that like? What's that experience like? Where do you experience joy in your life? Who is God for you? Who's Jesus in your life? What's your experience of the church been? They might also ask the parents and family members of LGBT Catholics these questions. Because one of the things I've discovered in the last couple of months is that ministry to LGBT Catholics is also ministry to their family and friends. I was up at another university called Yale, up at New Haven, which is a place for people that can't get into Georgetown. It's a very small school. And I was giving a talk at the Campus Ministry Center, and it was on Jesus, on this Jesus book. And this woman came up to me afterwards. The news of this book that was coming out had been released. And this elderly woman came up to me. She's probably in her 80s, and she said, Father Jim, I have something to tell you. And I thought, oh, she's going to say I was in the Holy Land or I read one of your books. You know what she said? She said, my grandchild is transgender, and my prayer every night is that she finds a home in the church. And I thought, ministry to LGBT Catholics is ministry to her. So what can we learn from her? What's it like being the grandparent of a transgender child? For the church to exercise any sort of compassion, we need to listen. And when we listen, we'll also hear their calls for help and prayer. When our LGBT brothers and sisters are persecuted, church leaders are called to stand with them. Now, in many parts of the world, in 70 countries, you can be jailed for being LGBT, right? Places like Azerbaijan and Chechnya, right? There are LGBT roundups. You can be executed in some countries. The church has a moral duty to stand up for its brothers and sisters publicly, right? Sadly, this does not happen often, and in fact, some church leaders have supported some of these discriminatory laws in some of those countries. But again, this is part of resisting every sign of unjust discrimination. Closer to home, what would it mean for the church in the U.S. to say when needed, it is wrong to treat LGBT people like this? Catholic leaders, and here we are in D.C., the U.S. Bishops' Conference, regularly publish statements, as they should, defending the unborn, refugees and migrants, the poor, homeless, the aged. Honestly, the Bishops' Conference does a great job on these things, right? They promoted the March for Life. They came out immediately after the State of the Union last night with something on refugees. They have been in the forefront for refugees, as they should be. But where are the statements in support of LGBT people? Now, when I ask this, some people say, well, you can't compare what refugees face with what LGBT people face. And as someone, as Mark said, who worked with refugees for 2 years, I know that that's often the case. But it is also important not to ignore the disproportionately high rates of suicide among LGBT youths. And the fact that LGBT people are the victims of proportionally more hate crimes than any other group in this country. All right? Suicides. Guess what? LGBT issues are life issues. Right? They're life issues that should matter to the church because the church is pro-life. Bullying of LGBT kids in school is also an evil that should be squarely opposed, particularly given the Catholic Church's long history and experience with running schools. Now, as I mentioned before, in the wake of the massacres at the Pulse nightclub, I was very discouraged when more bishops did not signal their support. Some did. But why were they not able to do that? To me, it seemed a failure of compassion. You know, one of my professors in theology, you may know him, Father Jim Keenan, who's a great Jesuit moral theologian, really changed my way of looking at Jesus in the Gospels when he said that for Jesus, sin was not, Jesus did not critique people where they were weak and struggling, right? People were trying. Jesus critiqued people who are strong but not bothering. So think of like Lazarus and Dives, right? The rich man who just steps over the poor guy outside of his door, right? Or the Good Samaritan, right? The classic example. Just don't bother. Jim Keenan said, for Jesus, sin is a failure to bother to love. Isn't that great? In Orlando, the church failed to bother. Now, how do we go about doing this? Well, we need not look far for a model for this. God did this for all of us in Jesus. The opening lines of the Gospel of John are, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or tabernacled among us, or pitched his tent among us, lived with us, took our side, died with us. That's what the church is called to do with all marginalized groups, as Pope Francis has often reminded us, including LGBT people, the most marginalized people in the church, period. Now, some people say, no, women are more marginalized. Women are marginalized in this church, but not to that extent. There are, if you go to the Vatican, the Pope says we need more incisive roles for LGBT, for women. There's women's days, right? There's women's this, there are no things that are comparable for LGBT people, right? So we're called to experience life with them and suffer with them. And to be joyful with them, too. You know, one of the guys I work with at America is a young gay man, and I gave him my book before it came out, you know, the manuscript. And he said, oh my gosh, it's all about suffering. You know, we do have actual fun. So to celebrate life with them, right? Because Jesus came to experience all parts of our lives, right? Not just the dark parts. So can you rejoice with LGBT people, right? Your brothers and sisters. Can you rejoice in their gifts and talents and celebrate their treasure that they bring? So that's another way of being compassionate, experiencing life with them. Compassion. Finally, sensitivity. How can the institutional church be sensitive toward LGBT people? My old Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines sensitivity. It's a lovely definition as, quote, an awareness or understanding of the feelings of other people. That's closely aligned with Pope Francis's call for a culture of encounter and accompaniment. Now, to begin with, it's impossible to know another person's feeling at a distance, right? You can't understand the community if you don't know the community. You can't be sensitive to the LGBT community if all you do is issue documents about them, preach about them, or tweet about them without actually knowing them. One reason I think the institutional church has struggled with that sensitivity is that many church leaders still do not know many gay people, right? Now, you might laugh and say, well, they know a lot of, priests who are not out or nuns that are not out. But I mean, they do not know people who are lay people who are publicly out and living as open LGBT people. I'll tell you a story. A good friend of mine, he told me I could use his name. I just saw him a few weeks ago, named Brian, used to work with a bishop in this country, right? And as you probably know, bishops have different sort of point people for different things. So the bishop will have a point people for, say, Hispanic ministry or liturgy. Well, Brian was the point person for social justice for this fairly well-known bishop who's very well-known for social justice. And the two of them, and Brian's gay. And the two of them would take car rides together to go to some parish meeting or diocesan meeting. And in the car ride, the bishop would make homophobic jokes, talk about fags and things like that. Sorry to use that word. And Brian works for the guy, and the guy's relying on Brian. And so I said to Brian, why don't you come out to him? And he said, are you kidding? He's the last person I would come out to. He's homophobic, I could lose my job. So what happens? So the bishop is denied an opportunity to get to know a flourishing LGBT Catholic who's working for him. There's so many occasions like this, right? Many church leaders do not know on a personal level LGBT people who are public about their sexuality. That lack of familiarity and especially friendship means that it is more difficult to be sensitive. How can you be sensitive to a person's situation if you don't know them? So one invitation is for the hierarchy to come to know LGBT Catholics not as just people you give communion to, right? Not as objects of pity, and certainly not as objects of scorn, but actual friends. In 2015, Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, the Archbishop of Vienna, reminded us of this at the meeting of the Synod of Bishops on the Family. Remember that 2-year meeting that Pope Francis called? Around that time, Cardinal Schönborn spoke of a gay couple he knew who had transformed his understanding of LGBT people. He even offered some praise for same-sex unions. This is the Cardinal Archbishop of Vienna. You ready? Quote, "Not everything is the same as it is in this country." Quote, "One shares one's life. One shares the joys and sufferings. One helps one another. We must recognize that this person has made an important step for his own good and for the good of others." The Cardinal Archbishop of Vienna. He also overruled a priest in his archdiocese who had prohibited a man in a same-sex union from serving on a parish council. Did you hear that? He overruled the priest who kicked the gay guy out. Much of this, he said, came from his experience and his knowledge of and his friendship of LGBT people. Cardinal Schönborn said of the church simply, it must accompany people. In this, as in all things, Jesus is our model. When Jesus encountered people on the margins, he saw not categories, but individuals. Now, I'm not saying that the LGBT community should be or should be made to feel marginalized. Rather, I'm saying that within the church, many of them do feel marginalized and find themselves marginalized. They are seen as the other. But for Jesus, there is no other. There's no us and them. There's just us for Jesus. And by way of conclusion, I want to talk about 2 stories that I find very helpful from the Gospels that help us reflect on the LGBT experience. Now, they are not perfect, okay? They're not perfect stories, but I'd like you to sort of enter into them a little bit. The first one is the Roman centurion in Capernaum. Remember that? That was just a couple weeks ago. So Jesus is in Capernaum, a seaside town on Galilee of about 1,500 to 2,000 people. It's still there. The ruins are still there. And there's a centurion there. And the centurion comes up to Jesus, and as you probably know, says that his servant is ill. Right? Now, the Jewish people say, be nice to this guy, he built our synagogue, the ruins of which are still there, by the way. 1st century synagogue, still there. Jesus says, well, I'll come to your house. And the guy says, words we repeat every day at Mass. I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof. By the way, interestingly, who do we quote every day at Mass? Not Mary, not St. Joseph, a centurion. Is that interesting? An outsider. He says, I'm not worthy. I have people under my authority. All you have to do is say the word. I say to one guy, go, and he goes. I say to another guy, do this, and he does it. Jesus is amazed. He said, never in Israel have I seen such faith. And he heals the servant. Now, what's the point? The guy is a pagan, right? What does Jesus say? Does Jesus say, pagan? Hey, pagan, sinner. You're not even Jewish. Come back when you're circumcised. That would probably change the dynamic a little bit. Well, I don't want my servant healed that much. He does not say, you're a pagan, I'm not going to talk to you. This is a guy on the margins. He's not even Jewish. What does he do? He listens to him. He encounters him. He accompanies him. He treats him with respect. And he does this great favor for him. And then he praises the guy's faith over everybody else. This is how we are to treat people who feel on the margins. And then an even more powerful story for me is the story of Zacchaeus in the Gospel of Luke. Now, it is not a perfect story, but it's a very powerful one for me. So in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is going through Jericho, the oldest continually inhabited town in the world, still there. He's passing through. It's a huge town, right? say 10,000, 20,000 people. It's towards the end of Jesus' ministry. He's about to go to Jerusalem, okay? He's there with his followers. Now, how many people is that? Well, we know 12 apostles, right? Disciples maybe 72, followers even more. So he's probably with at least 100 people in his entourage, right? He's going through Jericho. Who's in Jericho? Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is the chief tax collector. Now, at the time, that would have been seen as the chief sinner. He's on the margins. People hate him. Now, I want you to think of Zacchaeus as an emblem for the LGBT Catholic, not because of sin, because we're all sinful, but because he's on the margins. He's probably the most marginalized person in that town. Jesus comes through, and Zacchaeus, who was described as short in stature, that's what the Gospels tell us, climbs a sycamore tree because, in that beautiful phrase, he wanted to see who Jesus was. But he could not see because of the crowd. How often does the crowd get in between the LGBT person and an encounter with Jesus? He has to climb a tree, probably very embarrassing, right? He literally goes out on a limb to see Jesus, right? So many LGBT people. Think of that autistic 30-year-old man. Think of what he has to do just to receive communion. And who's getting in the way? Jesus goes through Jericho, thousands of people there. Who does he point to? You. You. Come down from that tree. Zacchaeus comes down from the tree. He scurries down. And in my favorite line, the crowd begins to grumble. Right? Go online. And that's where you'll see. The crowd grumbles. An extension of mercy to someone on the margins always angers people. That's what you see online today. The crowd is grumbling. But Zacchaeus, the Greek is stathes. He stood his ground. And he says, if I've defrauded anyone, I will repay them 4 times over. And Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house. An encounter with Jesus leads to conversion. Now, I don't mean conversion therapy, right? I mean metanoia, change of mind and heart, right? For Jesus, it's always community first and conversion, change of mind and heart, second. We all need conversion, right? We all need that encounter with Jesus. So when people say that Jesus said sinner first, absolutely not. It's not his way. Look in the Gospels. This is what the church is called to do with people who feel like they're on the margins. Encounter them, listen to them, accompany them, heal them, help them, love them, because that's what Jesus did. Now, in conclusion, I want to say that I get a lot of LGBT people who ask me whether or not they really belong to the church, which is a really painful question for me, just to hear that. That's probably how Zacchaeus felt, you know? The crowd's getting in the way. So I want to share a story by way of conclusion. So as I said, my Jesuit community, we live next to a church called the Church of St. Paul the Apostle, run by the Paulists, a religious order, American-based religious order. And I'll confess something. Like you, I'm not always celebrating Mass every Sunday. I'm in the pews a lot, right? And I have certain likes and dislikes. This is my confession. One of my dislikes, for example, is they say, oh, well, we have great news. After communion, we have a mission appeal, and someone's going to talk to us about their work. I said, oh, my gosh. Do you know, I was working at St. Ignatius up on Park Avenue in New York once, and a sister from Africa came up, and I was asked to say, the words everybody does not want to hear. After communion, we'll have a mission appeal from Sister so-and-so. And anyway, she got up. I was there. She got up and she said, hi, I'm Sister, Amelia. Probably not Amelia. I'm Sister, I don't know where I came up with that name. I'm Sister Mary, and And I work in whatever place in Africa. The people there are very poor. You have a lot of money. Please give it to me. And she sat down. People were so happy. I think it was more for just, saving time. The other thing I find frustrating, it's a confession, and I apologize to all the devout Catholics in the audience, is when they say, great news, we have a baptism today. It's like, oh my gosh. So I was at St. Paul the Apostle, and Father Gil Martinez, who's the great pastor there, he said, great, he's very effusive. Great news, we have a baptism today. And you really could hear the people just kind of shifting. Well, anyway, he did a great job. He did a great job, and like all good priests, he was able to weave the baptism into the ceremony of the Mass, which is really beautiful. And so the profession of faith, do you reject Satan, which I call the Michael Corleone questions. Well, do you reject all of his evil, all of his empty promises, was incorporated into the profession of faith. This is really beautiful. And then at the rite of baptism, the actual part of with the water, he had us all turn around and face the back of the church, where there's this beautiful font, beautiful. And everybody's always excited about that. And so the girl's name was Ellie, the baby's name. And he said, I baptize you, Ellie, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And then he took the baby, and he held the baby up and said, Ellie, welcome to the Christian community. And at that moment, the organ boomed out the first three notes of that great Easter song, The Strife is O'er. Boom. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. It was this huge sound. And I've been a Jesuit 30 years and a priest 20 years. I think I finally understood baptism. I thought, yes, this is a life-changing moment for this child, for her parents, for the church, for the universe. Right? A child has been welcomed into the church in an irrevocable way. And do you know what I thought of at that moment, my brothers and sisters? LGBT Catholics. All of you who are out there who are LGBT Catholics were baptized into the church. Nothing can take that away from you. You are just as much a part of the church as Pope Francis, as Cardinal Wuerl, as me. Don't let anyone take that away from you. And the next time someone says that you don't belong in the church, you just hold up your baptismal certificate. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have time for questions. There's two mics, right, in the two aisles. And as you were told, please ask it as a question. So, yes.
Hi, Father Martin. Thank you
Yes.
so much. So tonight in New York, Ross Douthat, a debater of yours, is talking to Massimo Fagioli, and obviously you did the same with Mr. Douthat last month. And just thinking about, obviously you're talking about one kind of culture of encounter within the church, but I'm thinking, obviously you received such a pushback from in the book, and I'm thinking to ask you how we can promote a culture of encounter within the American church in particular, between maybe traditionalist voices, neo-traditionalist voices, and liberal Catholic voices as well, because that seems to be in the past couple of years it's getting more and more divisive, and I wonder how we can promote a culture of encounter.
Excellent question. I would say I only have an incomplete answer to that, which is, I think, first of all, to treat people with respect, to give them I think the Ignatian ideal of giving people the benefit of the doubt. Ignatius, at the beginning of the spiritual exercises, what's called the presupposition, before the exercises even begin, says, in order to sort of understand somebody, you need to put a good interpretation of what they're saying. Give them the plus sign. These are all good Catholics who are trying their best. That's the first thing. Give people the benefit of the doubt, respect them. no name calling, right? Try not to sort of have things devolve into just a debate. I think discussion is better. It's actually, funny enough, it's actually not that hard, to treat people with respect. I mean, Ross and I, I consider a friend now, we disagree very strongly on a lot of stuff. There was no name calling. I like him, and I really don't understand what has happened in the church. I think some of it is sort of some of the things you see, the pushback to my book online and some of these groups. I think some of it is a sort of substitute for getting angry at Francis. I also think the political situation in our country, it's become so contentious that somehow it's okay to just say terrible things about people publicly. And I think that the church, in all time should be a bulwark against that. Sadly, we find that within the church it's sometimes worse. I think sometimes people, they try to be so Catholic, they're barely Christian. All right. So it's a source of great pain for me, and I don't mean because they attack me. I'm actually okay with that. But it's a source of pain for me that it's like that in the church and that people see it. As a friend of mine says, see how they shove one another. So it's sad, but that's a good question. But I think giving people the benefit of the doubt and just treating them with simple respect, I think, really can help the conversation move ahead. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much again for coming. It's an honor to be able to see you speak. So much of your talk dealt with how to have love and respect for your LGBTQ brothers and sisters. However, I doubt that there are very many people in this room who are here seeing you speak who are actively homophobic or are struggling with that. And I think since there are parts of the Bible that do actively, talk about the act of, LGBTQ people, how should we feel as Catholics who maybe have gone so far into the love and respect that we, support things like gay marriage when the church, still isn't there yet?
You mean like sort of as a Catholic who supports it, but the church isn't there yet?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a good question. What do you do with your conscience? I think one of the things to remember is that is one teaching of the church, right? And it's so I don't think, for example, that you should say I cannot be Catholic because I don't follow that. I don't think that. I mean, I think you could say, I can't be Catholic if I don't believe that Jesus Christ, didn't rise from the dead, or something like that. But I think what happens also is that Catholics use, and I would say not just Catholics, people take the Bible often out of context, when they're talking about different teachings from the Bible. And they do that in a way that they do for almost no other group, right? I mean, like usury. I mean, it's pretty clear the Bible is against usury, but we're okay with that now because we say, well, we have to understand that in context. So I think part of it is inviting Catholics to understand the Bible and to understand that tradition within the context of history. Do you know the famous Dr. Laura Schlesinger letter? Do you know that letter? So I may not be able to call it up. I don't know if we have cell phone access here. There's a very famous letter, which I should print out because I'm always quoting it. And in the 1990s, I'll just read you a little bit of it. In the 1990s, there was a very conservative talk show host named Dr. Laura Schlesinger. And she was asked once, this is an answer to your question, she was asked once about homosexuality, and she gave this really sort of strong response that really annoyed people. And let's see if I can find it. And hold on. That's not it. My gosh, there's all sorts of crazy things on the internet. Hold on. Here it is. If you don't mind, in terms of reading things in context, I like to read this at talks. This is about what do we do with these particular teachings in the Bible. Now, I know you're talking more about church teaching, but this is important too. Dear Dr. Laura, thank you so much for doing so much for educating people regarding God's law. I've learned a great deal from your show, and I try to share that knowledge with as many people as I can. When someone tries to defend the homosexual lifestyle, for example, I simply remind them that Leviticus 18:22 clearly states it to be an abomination. End of debate. I do need some advice from you, however, regarding some other elements of God's law and how to follow them. When I burn a bull on the altar of sacrifice, it now creates a pleasing odor for the Lord, Leviticus 1:9. The problem is my neighbors. They claim the odor is not pleasing to them. Should I smite them? I have a neighbor who insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly states he must be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself? Or should I ask the police to do it? Most of my male friends get their hairs trimmed, including the hair around their temples, even though this is expressly forbidden by Leviticus 19:27. How should they die? And this is my favorite. Now, we're laughing. It's good to laugh because people use the homosexuality texts in that way without any historical context. This is my favorite. My uncle has a farm. He violates Leviticus 19:19 by planting 2 different crops in the same field. As does his, with the homosexuality things, they come from Leviticus. As does his wife, by wearing garments made of 2 different kinds of thread, cotton and polyester. He also curses and blasphemes. Is it really necessary that, as Leviticus 24:10-16 says, we have to go to the trouble of getting the whole town together to stone them? Couldn't we just, as Leviticus 20:14 says, burn them to death at a private family affair, like we do people who sleep with their in-laws? I know that you have studied these things extensively and thus enjoy considerable expertise, so I'm confident you can help. Thank you again for reminding us that God's word is eternal and unchanging. So that's context. I think we need context. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, Father Martin. Thank you so much for your talk. I think your words resonated with a lot of us, and especially in my personal experience, I've really encouraged friends that are LGB to stay in the church and continue coming. But at the end of the day, it's hard when it's not coming from the top. My words aren't that authoritative or meaningful. And I was wondering if you thought that there was a way that we could help influence those decision makers and the institutional church.
That's a great question. What's your name?
Catherine.
Catherine.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say 2 things. I think that your words are meaningful to them. You're a Christian? You're a Catholic?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're baptized, right? Priest, prophet, and ruler. And so you are in your role as a Catholic speaking the word of God to them. God's love is working through you. And I always like to say to people, when you're talking to your friend who might feel estranged, God did not put Pope Francis or St. Ignatius or Mother Teresa in front of that person. God put Catherine in front of that person, you. And so to really take that seriously, that you may be God's sort of voice to this person and the church's voice to this person. So I think it is important what you say to these people, because sometimes that's the only love that they're going to hear. This 30-year-old autistic young man, the call was arranged, I didn't tell the whole story, but the call was arranged by a friend of his who emailed me and called me and set up a time. That guy's the voice of God in this person's life. How do we influence church leaders, though? I think by encouraging them to listen and by challenging them when we can, in a respectful way. You also have to treat them with respect. And really, to encourage the LGBT community to speak up and to really own their place in the church, But I want to end on should we end here or? One more. Okay, Catherine, I just want to say 2 things. There are 2 changes that are happening that I find very hopeful, that I always point to people. Number 1, it's encapsulated in 2 words, and those words are Pope and Francis. Now, Pope Francis, as you know, his 5 most famous words are, "Who am I to judge?" Right? Now, most people say, "Oh, big deal." It is a big deal. You talk to LGBT people, that's a big deal. That's a shift, right? And by the way, he was talking. Someone asked him about gay priests. That was the question on the his He's sort of developed a new style of communication. It's the papal press conference on the plane on the way back. The joke, I know a lot of the Vatican press corps, and they say that the joke is that like nothing happens on the ground, but it's like in the airplane. That's where they're really interested. And he was asked about gay priests, and he said, if someone's trying their best to follow God, who am I to judge? And the next day, some journalists who were angry at that question tried to put him in a corner and said, well, you just meant gay priests. And he said, no, I meant all gay people. You know, don't put Pope Francis in a corner. It's a quote, Dirty Dancing. But he's done more. He has said, he's used the word gay, right? No pope has ever used the word gay, right? He has a gay friend. His friend, when he was in the United States, you remember that debacle with Kim Davis? They brought her before him, and it was this big PR mess, right? And he really didn't know who she was, et cetera. Who did he have an audience with? He had an audience with his friend Yayo Grassi, his former student from Argentina, and Yayo's partner, publicly. You can go online and see it, right? He has gay friends, right? That's huge. He has also put people in positions of authority and has appointed cardinals and archbishops and bishops who are more LGBT friendly, right? Last summer, in the Archdiocese of Newark, Cardinal Joseph Tobin had a welcome mass for LGBT people. That's unthinkable 5 years ago. Cardinal Supich in Chicago said that we need to listen to LGBT people. He uses the word LGBT, right? So that is extraordinary. And the second thing that's happening is this. More and more LGBT people are coming out, okay? They're more public about their identity and their sexuality. As more and more LGBT people come out, more and more families are affected. As more and more families are affected, more and more they bring those desires and their hopes into their parishes, right? And that means more and more parishes are affected, more and more priests are affected, more and more deacons and lay leaders and bishops. So it's happening. And so I think the hysterical pushback on this book is a sign that people who of that ilk see this happening and they're terrified. They see the change happening. It's inevitable. It's inevitable because more and more people are coming out, and it's all to the good. And both of those things are actions of the Holy Spirit, I believe. So part of it is also trying to encourage the LGBT person by saying that things get better, right? Maybe one more question? Yes.
Hi,
Hi.
I loved your poem, I loved your book and
Thank
your
you.
talk. Quick story and a question, but
Sure.
I think you may have answered it. My son came out a few days before John Carroll in San Francisco, which I attended, and he got accepted to Georgetown, and it was so traumatic for the family, he didn't come. Not because of Georgetown, it was just a really difficult time. But that's not my question, that's just a story. My question is, I think you answered it, but if you had your wishes and Pope Francis could do something really radical, what would he do for the LGBT? And maybe that's in your book.
Wow, you're asking a Jesuit to think about radical things, huh? Let me ask you something. You said, I just want to be clear, your son came out, is that right?
He came out 2 days before we were supposed to fly to DC for the new students. And then I went to John Carroll, and I had to explain to all my friends and professors and everybody in missions, well, why is Andrews not considering going to Georgetown? And I couldn't say, because he just came out, and we're all sort of in a crazy mode. He is thinking of majoring in architecture, but that was besides the point.
Did he not come because he was afraid of the reception he would get, or?
No, and that's not the point. I think he was we were all so
Yeah,
confused.
sure.
And
Yeah.
I was happy he came out. It hurt me to see him suffer so much. And I'd seen him quietly suffering for a while. And I didn't know how to help him. Because as you said, I needed help. And my older son, who was at Georgetown at the time, he needed help because he's Mr. Rugby. And now they're best friends. But it was just hard. And as I walk through campus now with one of my best friends who came to be with me this weekend, I still regret he didn't come to Georgetown. I can't get that out of my brain, and I kind of blame myself for not making him on the plane. I had bought the tickets. the two of us were going to go. He just said he didn't want to go, and I still feel that's a big mistake, because, anyway.
Well,
that's-
listen.
I'm not supposed to be talking, I'm not
No, that's
supposed to ask
okay. No, I mean,
questions.
listen, thank you for sharing that, and also, thank you for being happy for him coming out.
Oh,
That's a big deal. That's a big deal. I look at the statistics about the number of LGBT people and youths who are on the street, right? It's because families don't accept them. So thank you for welcoming him, and thank you for loving him. That's the most important thing. As for something radical that the Pope would do, we wake up every day and the Pope does something radical. It's hard to keep up with him. I would say that I think that the words objectively disordered and intrinsically disordered in the Catechism really need to be looked at. And I'll tell you a story. So I was at a talk at St. Joe's in Philly, and by the way, go Eagles. And a woman came up to me, and we were talking about that language, and she had a 14-year-old gay son. And I put this in the new version of this book because it really struck me. And she said, do people who write that understand what words like that can do to a 14-year-old boy? Quote, they could destroy him. So we need to listen to that mother. How is that language being received by people? Right? I can think of no two words that have caused more harm to LGBT Catholics than those words. And so I would ask the Pope to reflect on that and maybe to meet that mother, see where we go. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Gstalders, the family, Herb and Bobby, and why don't we just take a moment and just end with a prayer, if that's okay? Loving God, we come before you in memory of Ellen, who we know is with you and celebrating. We ask you to open our hearts to one another, and especially to those on the margins. We ask you to help create a place in your church for our LGBT brothers and sisters and siblings. And we ask all this in the name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. And Hoya Saxa.